So the claim I'm responding to is that euthanasia is most effective option for those who are terminally ill or have a disorder of consciousness. The claim that was given to me was that euthanasia ends patient suffering. Opting out of euthanasia when necessary is a waste of resources, monetary, medical, nutrition, and etc. And that euthanasia is not equivalent to murder. So first off, to the first claim was euthanasia ends patient suffering, is that there is no evidence that the patients are in pain or how severe the pain is, since the main claim says that euthanasia will end the patient's suffering. There should be evidence that there is in fact suffering and reasons why the suffering should be ended. He does give an example of a woman with ALS, but does not describe the pain she has, how terribly it affects her, or why assisted suicide is beneficial rather than living through the diagnosis like others with this disease. Another issue is that he uses certain keywords that do not correspond with the issue, such as what's the point of living, which he asks. First off, this is a claim of value, as well as the phrase never being conscious again, which is a hasty generalization. Both of these phrases cause the argument to weaken. It weakens it because you cannot use a claim of value to support a claim of fact. For example, he talks about families making a choice for the patient, which is a claim of value. Also, the fallacy hasty generalization weakens the argument because there is no evidence that there is hope to return from an unconscious state, especially minor unconscious states such as comas, which usually you can get out of. To the secondary claim, opting out of euthanasia is a waste of resources and money. The advocate fails to state why paying for hospital expenses is not worth the wait when one day a sickness can be overturned. This does not account for terminal diseases, for the fact that there is no coming back, but the disorder of conscience indeed has been reversed. For example, 2 men recovered amazingly in a research conducted by Dr. Stefanos Kofias from Athens University, and a quote is, the improvement in the level of consciousness was a very pleasant observation for us. It might have been due to the additional beneficial effect of receiving intrathecal baclofen in this group of patients. All 6 patients improved spasticity scores with treatment, and 2 also made gains in recovering consciousness apparently. And also the fact that with new technology, brain scans can help predict future recovery for a patient. The results of a brain scan are 74% accurate, which gives hope in lives for patients rather than immediately ending their lives. The advocate does not specify the level of disorder of consciousness. For example, a coma is a disorder of consciousness that is often recovered. It would strengthen his argument if he would not use the term disorder of consciousness so vaguely. My response to the third claim, that euthanasia is not equivalent to murder. BBC News is a source that was used on the advocate's bibliography, and I looked it up and found information that was left out from his speech. Most importantly, this information contradicted his third point, that euthanasia is not equivalent to death. The part he left out was on the topic of voluntary and involuntary euthanasia, considering he was referring to all forms of euthanasia, especially stating that the family should be allowed to make a choice for the patient, which is involuntary euthanasia. The BBC source states, involuntary euthanasia is usually murder, but not always. The fact that it usually is still considers that it is murder. Further on, the advocate uses the analogy, since suicide is not illegal, neither should euthanasia, but due to his misuse of evidence, that analogy is no longer effective. So, with the 3 points that he said, euthanasia ends patient suffering, opting out of euthanasia when necessary, and a euthanasia is not equivalent to murder. Certain things that he used, such as his information, his hasty generalization, and his ineffectiveness is using all information that he found in his resources weakens his argument. Thank you.
All right, Elizabeth, you labeled the advocate's claims very clearly. You signposted as you got to each of those points clearly also, so it's pretty easy to follow. On the first point, you challenge a lack of evidence. You basically argue that the ALS case is not necessarily applicable here because it doesn't include enough information. I think that's a reasonable press to present here. I think what is missing is maybe some counterclaim that suggests that pain and suffering is not automatically part of a terminal illness, and that would not be hard to come by, and there's also treatments that are available for people with pain and suffering, so I think you miss an opportunity to have some counterclaims that would be really useful on this point here. The argument that there's a hasty generalization, it's stated, but you don't have any evidence to explain why it's a hasty generalization. On the second point, I didn't think your position is very clear. There's this, I wasn't quite sure what you were doing with your evidence, and then finally it sounded like what you were saying is that some patients do recover or get better. I think you do have a counterclaim here. It comes down to treatment for people in this condition is possible. That's what you need to have, is you need that declarative sentence to make the argument clear. And then I would understand why it is I'm listening to this information about the two people that are recovering from the illness that they were suffering from. The third point, again, you've got some evidence challenges here. Basically, it's an argument that says that the advocate's own evidence suggests that it is the equivalent of murder. I do think that you might want to make the same argument about an issue being a value claim on this particular point, because it really involves making a judgment about what's going to constitute murder. The quote that you have is okay, but why does involuntary euthanasia usually constitute murder? Why is that the case? Because somebody else is making the decision, because they're not doing it in the best interest of the person? I don't know. And by the way, I think there's another argument to be made here that might be useful to you, and that is that if you're dealing with the economic argument that was made earlier, that might become a motivation for people to make decisions on behalf of others that is not motivated by their interest, but rather by the self-interest of the person who's deciding for them. There's a lot of reading in the presentation and too much rushing through the presentation. I think what we get here is a paper that's being read to us instead of an oral argument. I think you need to do a little bit better job speaking to the audience. All right, thank you very much.